consequence to that where I was saying, well, I could make a positive consequence of them, not working on Friday afternoon to say, well, what kind of things could fit in with people being in that particular state. It's not they stop working, they change state, and what could be a positive consequence of that? Something like that.
More accurate in your work if they're relaxed.
Right. Yeah. In other words, what he's saying is that a consequence of the fact that they stop working might be that they would be more accurate in another area. Let's do...
Another consequence could be, it's true that they maybe work less ordinarily, but if you don't pay them, they may be resenting you that whole afternoon and work less because of that.
Yeah, another thing is, so he says if you don't pay them, that the consequence could be that they resent you, and I think that would be a good way of taking just this one and doing it, yeah.
Well, the problem isn't that he's going to pay him. He's going to have to pay him. It's a matter of...
Yeah, so he's saying the problem isn't paying them, it's when you pay them. I mean, so you could say, this is the really, I could hear that what I'm understanding you doing there is chunking this up. I could take this and chunk it up and saying, well, it's not really the issue is whether you pay them at lunch or not. Really, what I'm hearing you say is a larger issue of timing in when you reinforce people. The timing of reinforcement. Now notice, that's what I was saying yesterday as a chunk up. So if this is true, then I can do interesting things like go to animal studies. I can point out how the interesting thing about human beings is you know that, then this is a true story, by the way, here's an analogy. You know that they did research where, they have rats run a maze and they put cheese at the end? And so they decided to see how human beings would work, in comparison to rats. So they took $5 and ran college students through, and they got $5 at the end. Now here's the interesting thing about reinforcement, if we're going to chunk up to there. When they stopped putting the cheese at the end, rats quit running the maze. College students, on the other hand, and this is true, would actually break into the lab at night to go through the maze to see if they left money at the end. College students never stopped. They always went through it to see if the money was at the end, even if they didn't put it there for a long time. So, yeah, so that's what I'm saying as we go to. So if we chunk it up, but see, that's the interesting thing is we go chunk it up and say, wait a minute, let's look at reinforcement, timing of reinforcement. Actually, what the studies show is not that people stop doing it if the money isn't there. In fact, that they keep doing it. And it's true that variable reinforcement is a more effective way of installing a behavior to last. For example, what I do with the guys say something like, if I wanted to use that study, I'd say, really what you want to do is sometimes pay them at lunch and sometimes pay them at the end of the day, so they won't know. Or something like that. That is that, maybe you could pay them half at lunch and half at the end, or I don't know. So, and try variable reinforcement schedules. And in other words, what I'm saying is, if the guy's going to not treat people as, if you're not going to treat a person as a person anyway, well, let's go and treat them like they're rats. But I mean, what you're doing is you're pacing and leading it and saying, well, how do rats get reinforced? Do rats stop working after they get the cheese? I don't know. It depends on the various elements of the reinforcement. So I can chunk up to there, and now what I'm doing is not talking about people and not getting into any of the interpersonal things or the ego things. And we're talking about animal reinforcement now, not just people reinforcement. So that would be chunking up. Okay, let's take some other things.
Well,
let's start here. Okay, ladies first.
It sounds like
You mean?
Yeah, him talking about it. And we can't know all the facts. And as an employer and having had employees, I know some of the things too that go on from that point of view. And I have had employees that were girls that's money burned a hole in their pocket. So if they did get paid,
They went out.
They went out to blow it immediately. And of course they may come back and having had that experience have more fun in the rest of the day, but they
Get
might
your mind
not,
out of the gutter, Mary.
they might not come back at all. And then also there are some that I've had that I know are alcoholics, and if they get their money, they might spend it and then they drink for the rest of the weekend.
Now, by the way, listen to what she's doing is pacing. Hey, I know what it's like to be an employer too, but listen to what she's doing. She's chunking down. Some girls do, some girls don't. This is this, this is that. So, Mary.
And then some you don't want
I think she's been in Ed's trainings too long.
If you don't pay them, we'll be spending the rest of the day just thinking about how they're going to pay it and can't settle down.
Right, so she's saying is that actually...
It just depends.
What she's saying is doing, but what she does is, see, she brings an interesting thing. She paces. Some people do that, burns a hole in their pocket. A person's going, yeah, you understand what I'm talking about. And then she adds another element, which I think is really neat. She goes, and some girls, if you don't pay them until the end, they spend the whole afternoon thinking about how they're going to spend it anyway. So they waste the time anyway. We also had one person saying, you resent the time. You resent that you're not getting paid then. So now what we do, though, is at least we open it up so that there's equal time to, and I think this is what you're saying, is that at least opens up an option. So in other words, we start with a chunking down thing, and then we have some more options. Okay.
I was just thinking of the counterexample, but on the other hand,
Good.
think of all the enthusiasm and appreciation that you'll generate if you pay them at a time that would be more pleasing.
That's right. So now what Edmund, so we're good. We've got chunk up, we've got chunk down, we've done redefine, we've done consequence, and he says now we can do counterexample, which is, he says he was sort of saying as a counterexample, but people can also be pleased and so enthusiastic because you pay them when they want it, that they might actually work better for you. Now, I think a counterexample, let's take counterexamples and say, counterexample would be, are there any times, I would like a real specific way to even ask this guy for counterexample would be to say, in your lifetime of experience, did you ever have a time when you paid people and they didn't work anyway? I mean, you paid them at the end and they still didn't work up until the end. I mean, you could actually ask that person for a counterexample, which in a sense forces him to chunk down or her to chunk down. Also, I could say, is there times when you did pay people at noontime and they really actually worked harder at the end of the day? In your lifetime of experience. So now notice what I'm doing is I'm not trying to impose something on the individual. I'm actually asking the person for a counterexample. So and here's typically, by the way that you do this. You typically chunk down and then go to counterexamples. So here would be a very common strategy. I do her thing where I go, yeah, I know what that's like. Some people just burns money, just burns a hole in their pocket, or they go out and they spend on booze, blah, 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 I pace it. And I say, and some people don't. Some people might resent it if they don't get paid. So I just open up that option. And then I say, in fact, have you ever had times in your lifetime of experience where you did pay people at noon and they actually worked harder towards the end? And what about those kind of people and what made that happen? So now what you have is I've chunked down for them. I took control in a sense, chunked it down for them, and now I'm asking them for a counterexample. So I go pace, lead to a chunk down, and then actually ask for counterexample. Okay, I know there's a number of questions. Let's just for a second review. We've gone chunk down, chunk up. Here we're just doing counterexamples, which would be, and by the way, I did a counterexample to that with the rat metaphor. That was going to an analogy and making a counterexample to the belief. The one that we haven't done yet, what was the other one we did?
The change in the frame, which I haven't.
Change of frame size. Right. So he's got an example. Also, you've had your hand up for a moment there too.
Yeah, I was real curious when I heard you saying that some people would spend their money on alcohol, or some people would be thinking about how to spend it, and other people would be working on maybe the pleasure aspect of getting the money. Something I'd like to find out how you'd bring